beach, then you most certainly have experienced how difficult it can be to walk in dry sand. Most of the time when I go to the beach and walk in dry sand, I have to take my sandals or my sneakers off, because if I were to step my covered foot onto the deceptively small grains, I would feel probably about 10 pounds heavier. Not to mention, when you keep your sneakers or your shoes on and then you go home, you pour out about a pound of sand when you get home. But without shoes, even without them, bare feet tend to sink in the sand. And when most of us make the choice to trudge through it, we almost immediately regret not doing more squats in our lives. Because we know that our quads are going to pay the price for that decision tomorrow morning. And if your feet get wet and then you walk in the sand, well, forget it. Sand is going to be your personal nightmare for the next 3 months, because you are going to find it in every crevice of your life. For however tiny and insignificant a grain of sand is, when you get millions of those obstinate things together, it's almost unbelievable how heavy they become. Just try picking up a sandbag. Or don't if you have trouble picking up a child, a small child. Because that's not how much they weigh. Half full, you know, a bag weighs probably about 30 pounds. And if you get 30 of those bags together, you've got half a ton of weight. There's a reason why they use sandbags for military barricades and for flooding. The more sand we come upon, the heavier things feel. Well, 40 days into Jesus' desert wilderness, and I guess that he was coated in his fair share of sand. It hadn't been that long since Jesus took his swim in the salty, sweet waters of the Jordan and was given a mission from God to share God's righteousness with the world. It wasn't that long ago when, washed and refreshed by the waters of his baptism, Jesus felt this strange, overwhelming hunger to say yes to God. To accept God's mission. To resist evil in every form, because Jesus was determined that he was going to live into a purpose much larger than himself. This determination probably remained with him for the first few weeks of his desert journey. He probably felt okay. He was driven into the desert almost immediately after being washed by the waters, and he wandered through the desert as he waited for God's next move. But after 40 days of no food and no companionship or civilization, he had to have felt weighed down. He couldn't have been too surprised that he'd have to spend some time in the desert. All of God's chosen did their time. Noah spent 40 days stuck wading through a storm on a boat chock full of stinking, restless animals. Moses was camped out on a cloudy mountain for 40 days, waiting to hear from God on behalf of this group of people who were down in the valleys building new gods to love. Elijah was in the desert for 40 days before God decided to grace Elijah with his presence and tell him where to go next. And we've all heard of the Israelites, who journeyed not just 40 days, but 40 years in wilderness, searching for a destination that they hoped would satisfy their every desire. All of the greats did it. They wandered through this sandy terrain of life. But I do wonder if Jesus was prepared for what 40 days of a whole lot of nothing but sand felt like. The literal translation of the passage we read for this morning says, after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus hungered. Hungered as in ached. And perhaps the reason this hunger sounds a little bit different to us, maybe even a little less noble than the hunger Jesus initially felt for God's mission not 40 days ago, is because we know all too well the all too human feeling of wanting more. It doesn't matter how many times we've been washed by God's grace, we want more. The more we want could be for that which we don't yet have. It could be relief from our heavy loads. It could be a faith that feels more real, or reaps more reward, or gives us more abundance. But we live in a world that is always tempting us to be dissatisfied with what we have. Jesus had hardly a drop of water as he trudged through the desert, sinking in the sand. He was exhausted and lost and probably frustrated because God hadn't shown up yet. And I have to believe that in being human, Jesus would have felt the same prick for more in his spirit as he wandered aimlessly. Or the tempter wouldn't have been called the tempter in this passage, and Jesus would not have been able to make out his voice so clearly. And yet Jesus does something very interesting. Something that, given his circumstances, probably seems downright impossible to us. He resists. He resists the tempter. But how? How could he do it? How does Jesus resist? These are questions that most of us ask of this story because we're all too familiar with how difficult it is to resist the kinds of temptation that the devil brought to Jesus that day. Hunger, protection, power. As we read how Jesus resisted when the devil came and said, "You can satisfy your own desires instead of waiting for God, so just do it already." We know what it's like to wrestle with our own insatiable hunger for more. We know what it's like to look for any way possible to get what we want, whether it's more love or more acceptance or new direction or a different life. Maybe we struggle with something like addiction, and we feel like we want all the wrong things, or we feel like we use them to fill a void for what we don't have. We read Jesus and we think, how could he do it? And when the devil comes to Jesus and says, "If God really loves you, just throw yourself off a building. Test it out. See if God protects you." We can almost feel our own desire for assurance that God is with us in this life. That God hasn't given up on us. That God loves us even still. Maybe even finds value in keeping us around. How did Jesus do it? And after 40 days of feeling and seeing and having absolutely nothing, when the devil comes to Jesus and says, "I'll give it all to you. I'll give you power and kingdoms and glory, all for just one small fee," we cannot help but wonder how Jesus refrained from selling his soul, because we know exactly what we might trade if someone offered that to us. How did Jesus resist? Honestly, most of us answer this question by saying, well, he was Jesus. He was God. Right? And we're not that. So of course we can't do what Jesus did. Of course. But sometimes I wonder if we tell ourselves that only Jesus can do it because it's an easy way to justify our failings at resistance. We often make it out like the choice to resist for Jesus wasn't really hard, or that he didn't have this feeling of wanting more to begin with. Like Jesus had some sort of mystical power that we don't have. And certainly it's true that Jesus was different from us in one very important way. He was God. But he was also a God. He was also God who became human. Fully human. And so when we tell ourselves that only Jesus was built to resist sin, I do wonder if it says more about us than him. We begin this series today on this first Sunday of Lent, and it's called Living into Our Baptism. And each week we are going to take a look at one of the questions we answer when we are baptized. In baptism, the first question we answer is this: do you renounce the spiritual forces of wickedness? Do you reject the evil powers of the world and repent of your sin? We say yes. We commit to renouncing and resisting sin in baptism, though many of us hardly know what that really entails. In the United Methodist Church, we baptize both infants and adults because we believe that God acts in baptism and we don't need to recognize it in order for it to be true. But for those of us who are baptized as babies, someone else covenants on our behalf to resist sin and evil for us until we're old enough to do it for ourselves. And for those of us who were baptized as an adult, perhaps like Jesus, we chose to be baptized. And on the day that we were baptized, it may have felt for us like the heavenly clouds were parted a little bit, and God came a little extra close. We might have even felt inspiration by a vision that God cast over our lives, calling us to some higher righteousness and to live for the flourishing of others instead of ourselves. And we're overwhelmed by this awesome event that in the moment renouncing and resisting sin seems simple. But it isn't simple. It's not simple for us, and it's not simple for Jesus. Because life gets difficult, and we often have to wade in the desert, battling a near constant sandstorm of wanting our own lives to flourish, even though we know that sometimes our flourishing means that others don't. It's why we often feel so dissatisfied with our lives that we either ignore others or project our dissatisfaction onto them rather than helping them to flourish. It's why families are often torn apart by unhealthy and unfair expectations of each other, or why we walk into work and we treat our coworkers and our neighbors unfairly or second rate because we hate our jobs and we're upset about our lives. It's also why we hear about the broader problems in our world, the scientific facts about the degradation of the environment, or why the poor aren't fed when the rich become richer, or why we're nearly on the brink of war all the time. We'd rather our lives flourish. We'd rather have all the advancements of technology and industrialization and power and wealth that we don't think about what it does to the created world God brought into being. Resisting sin is not simple. And it is not easy. But Jesus didn't resist sin because of us. Jesus didn't have some magical power to do it that we don't have. Rather, Jesus understood quite clearly God's vision for a flourishing world. He believed that his actions mattered, not just because they connect him to God, but because they have the capacity to either set his neighbor free or bind him. In the United Methodist Church, baptism is a public event because we recognize that our faith is not an individual one. It is not an individual attempt to make ourselves right with God, though it often gets talked about that way. Resisting sin is not our individual attempt to keep God happy with us. Jesus calls us to resist sin in our baptisms because Jesus knew that what we believe and how we live it out in the world affects more lives than just our own. When Jesus came out of the sand 40 some odd days later, it wasn't the last time he was going to feel the weight of the sand. In fact, the choices that Jesus made in the desert were going to continue to play out in his life again and again and again. Because if Jesus would have allowed himself to get wrapped up in the devil's tempting for more, he likely would have never seen Andrew and Peter as they struggled down by the shore to fish and to think about their futures, and he probably never would have invited them to follow him along. If Jesus let his hunger take over that day, I'm not sure he would have ever felt the compulsion to take a few loaves of bread and some measly fish and share it with a crowd of thousands after a long, tired day of working. And if he hadn't turned down the devil's offer for power over the kingdoms of the world, he would have never been able to walk a way of sacrifice and offer a different kingdom, a new kingdom, a kingdom of God to all those who followed him. Jesus' decisions in the desert, they mattered. Jesus' decisions every day after, they mattered, and not just for his relationship to God, but because of his relationship with all of us. There was more at stake in the desert than Jesus' personal hunger. And he knew that his actions, they had the capacity to free us and bind us. And there was no temptation in the world that was worth risking our flourishing. By the grace of God, we have the power and the responsibility to resist sin in all its forms, and we don't just do it because it benefits our relationship to God. We are called to resist sin because when God created us to be in community. We must learn to recognize that our choices almost never just affect us, that we have the capacity to free our neighbors or bind our neighbors. To speak words of life or words of hate. To let all life flourish or just our own. You may have found ways of resisting temptation in your own personal lives. But one of the ways that we resist as a community is through worship. Today we are going to take communion together, and in many ways communion is an act of resistance. It's a time when we intentionally turn away from the self-serving world that we are all a part of, and we turn toward a new vision. One where we shake off the sandy weight of always wanting more and instead give thanks for what we've been given and learn to share it widely. This table is a place where all are invited, not just some. Where the bread and the cup are offered freely. There is no price. And the powers of selfishness are broken. A new vision of community begins to take shape here at this table, and every time we gather together, if you just stop long enough to notice. This is where we learn our very first task that God gave us to have dominion over creatures in the right way, by prioritizing someone else's flourishing over our own. So today, as we come to the table, for those of us who have been baptized, let us remember that on the day God washed us of all our sandy weight, we were asked to renounce and resist for the sake of the world. And for those of us who have not been baptized, this table is a place where you can start place where God calls to you and to all of us and desires to teach us what it is we were really